Equatorial Guinea, officially the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, is a country located on the west coast of Central Africa, with an area of formerly the colony of Spanish Guinea. Its post-independence name evokes its location near both the equator and the Gulf of Guinea. Equatorial Guinea is the only sovereign African state in which Spanish is the official language. The country had an estimated population of 1,222,245. Equatorial Guinea consists of two parts, an insular and a mainland region. The insular region consists of the islands of Bioko, formerly Fernando Po, in the Gulf of Guinea, and Annobon, a small volcanic island which is the only part of the country south of the equator. Bioko Island is the northernmost part of Equatorial Guinea and is the site of the country's capital, Malabo. The Portuguese-speaking island nation of São Tomé and Príncipe is located between Bioko and Annobon. The mainland region, Rio Muni, is bordered by Cameroon on the north and Gabon on the south and east. It is the location of Bata, Equatorial Guinea's largest city, and Ciudad de La Paz, the country's planned future capital. Rio Muni also includes several small offshore islands, such as Corisco, Lob Grande, and Lob Chico. The country is a member of the African Union, Francophonie, OPEC and the CPLP. Since the mid-1990s, Equatorial Guinea has become one of sub-Saharan Africa's largest oil producers. It is subsequently the richest country per capita in Africa, and its gross domestic product (GDP) adjusted for purchasing power parity (PPP) per capita ranks 43rd in the world. However, the wealth is distributed extremely unevenly, with few people benefiting from the oil riches. The country ranks 135th on the 2016 Human Development Index. Reporters Without Borders ranks President Teodoro Obiang Mambasogo among its predators of press freedom. Human trafficking is a significant problem. The 2012 U.S. Trafficking in Persons report stated that Equatorial Guinea is a source and destination for women and children subjected to forced labor and forced sex trafficking. The report rates Equatorial Guinea as a government that does not fully comply with minimum standards and is not making significant efforts to do so.
History.
Pygmies probably once lived in the continental region that is now Equatorial Guinea, but are today found only in isolated pockets in southern Rio Muni. Bantu migrations started probably around 2000 BCE from between southeast Nigeria and northwest Cameroon, the grassfields. They must have settled continental Equatorial Guinea around 500 BCE at the latest. The earliest settlements on Bioko Island are dated to 530s. The Annobon population, originally native to Angola, was introduced by the Portuguese via São Tomé Island.
First European contact 1472.
The Portuguese explorer Fernando Po, seeking a path to India, is credited as being the first European to discover the island of Bioko, in 1472. He called it Formosa Beautiful, but it quickly took on the name of its European discoverer. Fernando Po and Annobon were colonized by Portugal in 1474. In 1778, Queen Maria I of Portugal and King Charles III of Spain signed the Treaty of El Pardo, which ceded Bioko, adjacent islets, and commercial rights to the Bight of Biafra between the Niger and Doga rivers to Spain. Spain thereby tried to gain access to a source of slaves controlled by British merchants. Between 1778 and 1810, the territory of Equatorial Guinea was administered by the Viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata, based in Buenos Aires. From 1827 to 1843, the United Kingdom had a base on Bioko to control the slave trade, which was moved to Sierra Leone under an agreement with Spain in 1843. In 1844, on restoration of Spanish sovereignty, the area became known as the Territorios Espanoles del Golfo de Guinea. Spain had neglected to occupy the large area in the Bight of Biafra to which it had right by treaty, and the French had busily expanded their occupation at the expense of the area claimed by Spain. The Treaty of Paris in 1900 left Spain with the continental enclave of Rio Muni, a mere 26,000 kilometers out of the 300,000 stretching east to the Ubangi River which the Spaniards had initially claimed. The plantations of Fernando Po were mostly run by a black Creole elite, later known as Fernandinos. The British occupied the island briefly in the early 19th century, settling some 2,000 Sierra Leoneans and freed slaves there. Limited immigration from West Africa and the West Indies continued after the British left. To this were added Cubans, Filipinos and Spaniards of various colors deported for political or other crimes, as well as some assisted settlers. There was also a trickle of immigration from the neighboring Portuguese islands, escaped slaves and prospective planters. Although a few of the Fernandinos were Catholic and Spanish-speaking, about 9/10 of them were Protestant and English-speaking on the eve of the First World War, and Pidgin English was the lingua franca of the island. The Sierra Leoneans were particularly well placed as planters while labor recruitment on the windward coast continued, for they kept family and other connections there and could easily arrange a supply of labor. The opening years of the 20th century saw a new generation of Spanish immigrants. Land regulations issued in 1904 to 1905 favored Spaniards, and most of the later big planters arrived from Spain after that. The Liberian Labor Agreement of 1914 favored wealthy men with ready access to the state, and the shift in labor supplies from Liberia to Rio Muni increased this advantage. In 1940, an estimated 20% of the colony's cocoa production came from African-owned land. Nearly all of it was in the hands of Fernandinos. The greatest constraint to economic development was a chronic shortage of labor. Pushed into the interior of the island and decimated by alcohol addiction, venereal disease, smallpox, and sleeping sickness, the indigenous Bubai population of Bioko refused to work on plantations. Working their own small cocoa farms gave them a considerable degree of autonomy. By the late 19th century, the Bubai were protected from the demands of the planters by Spanish Claretian missionaries, who were very influential in the colony and eventually organized the Bubai into little mission theocracies reminiscent of the famous Jesuit reductions in Paraguay. Catholic penetration was furthered by two small insurrections in 1898 and 1910 protesting conscription of forced labor for the plantations. The Bubai were disarmed in 1917, and left dependent on the missionaries. Between 1914 and 1930, an estimated 10,000 Liberians went to Fernando Po under a labor treaty that was stopped altogether in 1930. With Liberian workers no longer available, planters of Fernando Po turned to Rio Muni. Campaigns were mounted to subdue the Fang people in the 1920s. At the time that Liberia was beginning to cut back on recruitment. There were garrisons of the colonial guard throughout the enclave by 1926, and the whole colony was considered pacified by 1929. Rio Muni had a small population, officially a little over 100,000 in the 1930s, and escape across the frontiers into Cameroon or Gabon was very easy. Also, the timber companies needed increasing numbers of workers, and the spread of coffee cultivation offered an alternative means of paying taxes. Fernando Po thus continued to suffer from labor shortages. The French only briefly permitted recruitment in Cameroon, and the main source of labor came to be Igbo smuggled in canoes from Calabar in Nigeria. This resolution to the worker shortage allowed Fernando Po to become one of Africa's most productive agricultural areas after the Second World War. This provincial phase saw the beginnings of nationalism, but chiefly among small groups who had taken refuge from the Cordillo's paternal hand in Cameroon and Gabon. They formed two bodies, the Movimiento Nacional de Liberación de la Guinea Monalije, and the Idea Popular de Guinea Equatorial. The pressure they could bring to bear was weak, but the general trend in West Africa was not. A decision of the 9th of August 1963, approved by a referendum of the 15th of December 1963, gave the territory a measure of autonomy and the administrative promotion of a moderate group, the MUNG. This proved a feeble instrument, and, with growing pressure for change from the UN, Madrid gave way to the currents of nationalism.
Independence 1968.
Independence from Spain was gained on the 12th of October 1968 and the region became the Republic of Equatorial Guinea. Francisco Montezuma became president in the country's only free and fair election. On Christmas Eve 1969, Montezuma had 150 alleged coup plotters executed. Montezuma further consolidated his totalitarian powers by outlawing opposition political parties in July 1970 and making himself president for life in 1972. He broke off ties with Spain and the West. In spite of his condemnation of Marxism, which he deemed neo-colonialist, Equatorial Guinea maintained very special relations with communist states, notably China, Cuba, and the USSR. Montezuma signed a preferential trade agreement and a shipping treaty with the Soviet Union. The Soviets also made loans to Equatorial Guinea. The shipping agreement gave the Soviets permission for a pilot fishery development project and also a naval base at Luba. In return, the USSR was to supply fish to Equatorial Guinea. China and Cuba also gave different forms of financial, military, and technical assistance to Equatorial Guinea, which got them a measure of influence there. For the USSR, there was an advantage to be gained in the war in Angola from access to Luba Base and later on to Malabo International Airport. Apart from allegedly committing genocide against the ethnic minority Bubi people, Montezuma ordered the deaths of thousands of suspected opponents, closed down churches and presided over the economy's collapse as skilled citizens and foreigners fled the country. The nephew of Montezuma, Teodoro Obiang, deposed his uncle on 3 August 1979. In a bloody coup d'état, over 2 weeks of civil war ensued until Mé was captured. He was tried and executed soon afterward, with Obiang succeeding him as a less authoritarian president. In 1995, Mobil, an American oil company, discovered oil in Equatorial Guinea. The country subsequently experienced rapid economic development, but earnings from the country's oil wealth have not reached the population and the country ranks low on the UN Human Development Index. Some 20% of children die before age 5 and more than 50% of the population lacks access to clean drinking water. President Teodoro Obiang is widely suspected of using the country's oil wealth to enrich himself and his associates. In 2006, Forbes estimated his personal wealth at $600 million. In 2011, the government announced it was planning a new capital for the country, named Oyala. The city was renamed Ciudad de la Paz, City of Peace, in 2017. Obiang is Africa's second longest-serving dictator after Cameroon's Paul Biya.
Politics.
The current president of Equatorial Guinea is Teodoro Obiang. The 1982 Constitution of Equatorial Guinea gives him extensive powers, including naming and dismissing members of the cabinet, making laws by decree, dissolving the Chamber of Representatives, negotiating and ratifying treaties and serving as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Prime Minister Francisco Pascual Obama Assu was appointed by Obiang and operates under powers delegated by the President. During the 4 decades of his rule, Obiang has shown little tolerance for opposition. While the country is nominally a multi-party democracy, its elections have generally been considered a sham. According to Human Rights Watch, the dictatorship of President Obiang used an oil boom to entrench and enrich itself further at the expense of the country's people. Since August 1979, some 12 real and perceived unsuccessful coup attempts have occurred. According to a March 2004 BBC profile, politics within the country are currently dominated by tensions between Obiang's son, Teodoro Obiang Mang, and other close relatives with powerful positions in the security forces. The tension may be rooted in a power shift arising from the dramatic increase in oil production which has occurred since 1997. In 2004, a plane load of suspected mercenaries was intercepted in Zimbabwe while allegedly on the way to overthrow Obiang. A November 2004 report named Mark Thatcher as a financial backer of the 2004 Equatorial Guinea coup d'état attempt organized by Simon Mann. Various accounts also named the United Kingdom's MI6, the United States CIA, and Spain as tacit supporters of the coup attempt. Nevertheless, The Amnesty International report released in June 2005 on the ensuing trial of those allegedly involved highlighted the prosecution's failure to produce conclusive evidence that a coup attempt had actually taken place. Simon Mann was released from prison on 3 November 2009 for humanitarian reasons. Since 2005, Military Professional Resources Incorporated, a US-based international private military company, has worked in Equatorial Guinea to train police forces in appropriate human rights practices. In 2006, U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice hailed Obiang as a good friend despite repeated criticism of his human rights and civil liberties record. The Amnesty International, Amnesty.org, retrieved on 5 May 2013. The anti-corruption lobby Transparency International put Equatorial Guinea in the top 12 of its list of most corrupt states. Freedom House, a pro-democracy and human rights NGO, described Obiang as one of the world's most kleptocratic living autocrats, and complained about the US government welcoming his administration and buying oil from it. Obiang was re-elected to serve an additional term in 2009 in an election the African Union deemed in line with electoral law. Obiang reappointed Prime Minister Ignacio Milumtang in 2010. In November 2011, a new constitution was approved. The vote on the constitution was taken though neither the text or its content was revealed to the public before the vote. Under the new constitution, the president was limited to a maximum of 2 7-year terms and would be both the head of state and head of the government, therefore eliminating the prime minister. The new constitution also introduced the figure of a vice president and called for the creation of a 70-member Senate with 55 senators elected by the people and the 15 remaining designated by the president. Surprisingly, in the following cabinet reshuffle it was announced that there would be 2 vice presidents, in clear violation of the constitution that was just taking effect. In October 2012, during an interview with Christiane Amanpour on CNN, Obiang was asked whether he would step down at the end of the current term 2009 to 2016 since the new constitution limited the number of terms to 2 and he has been re-elected at least 4 times. Obiang answered he refused to step aside because the new constitution was not retroactive and the 2-term limit would only become applicable from 2016. The 26th of May 2013 elections combined the Senate, lower house and mayoral contests all in a single package. Like all previous elections, this was denounced by the opposition and it too was won by Obiang's PDGE. During the electoral contest, the ruling party hosted internal elections which were later scrapped as none of the president's favorite candidates led the internal lists. Ultimately, the ruling party and the satellites of the ruling coalition decided to run not based on the candidates but based on the party. This created a situation where during the election the ruling party's coalition did not provide the names of their candidates, so effectively individuals were not running for office. Instead, the party was the one running for office. The May 2013 elections were marked by a series of events including the popular protest planned by a group of activists from the MPP movement of popular protest, which included several social and political groups. The MPP called for a peaceful protest at the Plaza de la Muja Square on 15 May. MPP coordinator Enrique Nsolonzo was arrested and official state media portrayed him as planning to destabilize the country and depose the president. However, and despite speaking under duress and with clear signs of torture, Nsolo said that they had planned a peaceful protest and had indeed obtained all the legal authorizations required to carry out the peaceful protest. In addition to that, he firmly stated that he was not affiliated with any political party. The Plaza de la Muja Square in Malabo was occupied by the police from 13 May and it has been heavily guarded ever since. The government embarked on a censorship program that affected social sites including Facebook and other websites that were critical to the government of Equatorial Guinea. The censorship was implemented by redirecting online searches to the official government website. Shortly after the elections, Opposition party CPDS announced that they were going to protest peacefully against the 26 May elections on 25 June. Interior Minister Clemente Ngonga refused to authorize the protest on the grounds that it could destabilize the country, and CPDS decided to go forward, claiming constitutional right. On the night of 24 June, the CPDS headquarters in Malabo were surrounded by heavily armed police officers to keep those inside from leaving, and thus effectively blocking the protest. Several leading members of CPDS were detained in Malabo, and others in Bata were kept from boarding several local flights to Malabo.
Geography.
Equatorial Guinea is on the west coast of Central Africa. The country consists of a mainland territory, Rio Muni, which is bordered by Cameroon to the north and Gabon to the east and south, and 5 small islands: Bioko, Corisco, Annobon, Lob Chico Small Lob, and Lob Grand Great Lob. Bioko, the site of the capital, Malabo, lies about off the coast of Cameroon. Annobon Island is about west-southwest of Cape Lopez in Gabon. Corisco and the 2 Lob Islands are in Corisco Bay, on the border of Rio Muni and Gabon. Equatorial Guinea lies between latitudes 4 degrees N and 2 degrees S, and longitudes 5 degrees and 12 degrees E. Despite its name, no part of the country's territory lies on the equator. It is in the northern hemisphere, except for the insular Annobon province, which is about south of the equator.
Climate.
Equatorial Guinea has a tropical climate with distinct wet and dry seasons. From June to August, Rio Muni is dry and Bioko wet. From December to February, the reverse occurs. In between there is gradual transition. Rain or mist occurs daily on Annobon, where a cloudless day has never been registered. The temperature at Malabo, Bioko, ranges from 2, though on the southern Mocha Plateau normal high temperatures are only. In Rio Muni, the average temperature is about. Annual rainfall varied from at Malabo to at Eureka, Bioko, but Rio Muni is somewhat drier.
Ecology.
Equatorial Guinea spans several ecoregions. Rio Muni region lies within the Atlantic equatorial coastal forests ecoregion, except for patches of Central African mangroves on the coast, especially in the Muni River estuary. The Cross-Sanaga-Bioko coastal forests ecoregion covers most of Bioko and the adjacent portions of Cameroon and Nigeria on the African mainland, and the Mount Cameroon and Bioko montane forests ecoregion covers the highlands of Bioko and nearby Mount Cameroon. The Sao Tome, Principe, and Annobon moist lowland forests ecoregion covers all of Annobon, as well as Sao Tome and Principe.
Administrative divisions.
Equatorial Guinea is divided into 8 provinces. The newest province is Djiblouti, created in 2017 with its headquarters at Ciudad de La Paz, the country's future capital. The other 7 provinces are as follows. Capitals appear in parentheses.
Economy.
Before independence, Equatorial Guinea exported cocoa, coffee and timber, mostly to its colonial ruler, Spain, but also to Germany and the UK. On the 1st of January 1985, the country became the first non-francophone African member of the franc zone, adopting the CFA franc as its currency. The national currency, the equel, had previously been linked to the Spanish peseta. The discovery of large oil reserves in 1996 and its subsequent exploitation contributed to a dramatic increase in government revenue. Equatorial Guinea is the 3rd largest oil producer in sub-Saharan Africa. Its oil production has risen to, up from 220,000 only 2 years earlier. Forestry, farming, and fishing are also major components of GDP. Subsistence farming predominates. The deterioration of the rural economy under successive brutal regimes has diminished any potential for agriculture-led growth. In July 2004, the United States Senate published an investigation into Riggs Bank, a Washington-based bank into which most of Equatorial Guinea's oil revenues were paid until recently, and which also banked for Chile's Augusto Pinochet. The Senate report showed at least $35 million siphoned off by Obiang, his family and regime senior officials. The president has denied any wrongdoing. Riggs Bank in February 2005 paid $9 million in restitution for Pinochet's banking. No restitution was made with regard to Equatorial Guinea. From 2000 to 2010, Equatorial Guinea had the highest average annual increase in GDP, gross domestic product, 17%. Equatorial Guinea is a member of the Organization for the Harmonization of Business Law in Africa (OHADA). Equatorial Guinea tried to be validated as a NITI (Transparency). Org. The 27th of September 2007, retrieved on the 5th of May 2013. According to the World Bank, Equatorial Guinea has the highest GNI, gross national income per capita, of any African country, 83 times larger than the GNI per capita of Burundi, the poorest country. Yet despite its impressive GNI figure, Equatorial Guinea is plagued by extreme poverty because its Gini coefficient of 65.0 is the highest in the entire world.
Transportation.
Due to the large oil industry in the country, internationally recognized carriers fly to Malabo International Airport, which, in May 2014, had several direct connections to Europe and West Africa. There are 3 airports in Equatorial Guinea: Malabo International Airport, Batu Airport and the new Inabon Airport on the island of Inabon. Malabo International Airport is the only international airport. Every airline registered in Equatorial Guinea appears on the list of air carriers prohibited in the European Union (EU), which means that they are banned from operating services of any kind within the EU. However, freight carriers provide service from European cities to the capital.
Demographics.
The majority of the people of Equatorial Guinea are of Bantu origin. The largest ethnic group, the Fang, is indigenous to the mainland, but substantial migration to Bioko Island since the 20th century means the Fang population exceeds that of the earlier Bubai inhabitants. The Fang constitute 80% of the population and comprise around 67 clans. Those in the northern part of Rio Muni speak Fang Tumu, while those in the south speak Fang Okar. The two dialects have differences but are mutually intelligible. Dialects of Fang are also spoken in parts of neighboring Cameroon, Bulu and Gabon. These dialects, while still intelligible, are more distinct. The Bubai, who constitute 15% of the population, are indigenous to Bioko Island. The traditional demarcation line between Fang and beach inland ethnic groups was the village of Nyafang, limit of the Fang, east of Bata. Coastal ethnic groups, sometimes referred to as Ndao or Playeros beach people in Spanish, Cooms, Jbas, Bailings, and Bengas on the mainland and small islands, and Fernandinos, a Creole community on Bioko Island. Together comprise 5% of the population. Europeans largely of Spanish or Portuguese descent, some with partial African ancestry, also live in the country, but most ethnic Spaniards left after independence. A growing number of foreigners from neighboring Cameroon, Nigeria, and Gabon have immigrated to the country. According to the Encyclopedia of the Stateless Nations 2002, 7% of Bioko Islanders were Igbo, an ethnic group from southeastern Nigeria. Equatorial Guinea received Asians and native Africans from other countries as workers on cocoa and coffee plantations. Other black Africans came from Liberia, Angola, and Mozambique. Most of the Asian population is Chinese, with small numbers of Indians. Equatorial Guinea has also been a destination for fortune-seeking European settlers from Britain, France and Germany. Israelis and Moroccans also live and work here. Oil extraction since the 1990s has contributed to a doubling of the population in Malabo. After independence, thousands of Equatorial Guineans went to Spain. Another 100,000 Equatorial Guineans went to Cameroon, Gabon, and Nigeria because of the dictatorship of Francisco Moise Nma. Some Equatorial Guinean communities are also found in Latin America, the United States, Portugal, and France.
Languages.
For years, the official languages were Spanish. The local variant is Equato-Guinean Spanish and French. Spanish has been an official language since 1844. It is still the language of education and administration. 67.6% of Equatorial Guineans can speak it, especially those living in the capital. Malabo, French was only made official in order to join the Francophonie, and it is not locally spoken, except in some border towns. Aboriginal languages are recognized as integral parts of the national culture. Constitutional Law No. 1 1998, January 21. Indigenous